The airport buzzed with chaos that somehow never touched her. Hannah Cross moved like she had practiced invisibility, quiet steps, eyes half lowered, blending into the sea of travelers. Her backpack hung off one shoulder, worn at the seams, straps fraying in places that spoke of constant travel. Most people didn't notice the faint metallic glint of a dog tag peeking from under her shirt, nor the subtle scars that traced the back of her hands like a secret map. She had always been the quiet girl, the one who could slip into any room and go unseen. Not because she wanted to, but because it was survival. She had learned early that silence was often louder than words, especially in places where the wrong attention could be deadly. And airports were full of the wrong attention. At the gate, she slipped past families with overstuffed carry-ons, business travelers checking emails, and teenagers laughing too loudly. Her eyes caught the screens flashing flight numbers, departure times, and gate assignments. Everything seemed normal, predictable, but Hannah knew better. She always did. Years in flight test programs, high-stakes simulations, and classified missions had taught her to read patterns, to notice subtle anomalies. A flight delayed by a minute, a pilot walking differently, a stranger whose eyes were scanning her rather than the boarding screens. When she reached the jet, she paused. Seat 14A window, exactly where she always chose. From this angle, she could see the horizon, the engines, the subtle sway of the wings, the tiny flickers in the ailerons. For some, it was just a view. For her, it was data, observation, preparation. She slid into the seat, adjusting the window shade just enough to cut the glare without losing sight of the sky. Around her, passengers settled into their routines. Overhead bins slammed, children cried, phones buzzed. She kept her head down, pulled the hoodie tighter, and pretended to read the in-flight magazine. But her hands never stopped moving, tapping lightly on the armrest, almost imperceptibly, like a pianist warming up before a performance. Every movement was calculated, almost ritualistic, a rhythm she had developed long ago. The cabin hummed with chatter. She overheard snippets, business trips, family vacations, casual complaints about delayed flights. Nothing extraordinary. Yet Hannah felt the tension under the surface. Not fear, exactly. She wasn't afraid. But the same thrill she always felt when a situation was about to change, when the quiet before the storm carried an unmistakable weight. 30 minutes after boarding, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Calm, professional, unremarkable. Ladies and gentlemen, will be cruising near restricted airspace today. You may see military aircraft. A ripple passed through the cabin. Phones lifted. Heads turned to the windows. Excitement, curiosity, fear. Most passengers didn't know the difference between a commercial aircraft and a fighter jet. To them, any sleek silhouette in the sky was impressive enough. To Hannah, it was a warning. Her eyes flicked to the wing, measuring, calculating. Her fingers twitched against the armrest. She could feel the slight vibration of the engines, the subtle pull of lift, the aerodynamics of the fuselage reacting to crosswinds. Data, stored and processed automatically by instincts honed over years she wasn't supposed to even remember. The first shadow streaked past the window without warning. It was sleek, black, fast, so fast it was almost a blur. People gasped. Cameras emerged. Someone whispered, F-22s. Hannah didn't flinch. She didn't move. But inside, her pulse synchronized with the jet's roar. She recognized it immediately, the sound, the speed, the signature of afterburners. No ordinary flight escort. Passengers craned their necks, murmuring, pointing. The air pressure in the cabin seemed to shift, not because of the jet itself, but because of the sudden collective awareness that something was different, dangerous, and outside normal protocol. She closed her eyes briefly, exhaling in a way only someone trained to control every microreaction could. She allowed herself a single thought: they know I'm here. It wasn't paranoia. She had been on missions where detection meant the difference between life and death. And these jets weren't just patrolling. They were hunting for a signal. She opened her eyes calm, not casual, calm, deliberate. She noticed the other passengers. One man clutched his phone like a lifeline. A mother soothed her crying child with a hand that shook slightly, betraying fear she tried to mask. Hannah registered their emotions almost involuntarily, the way a trained observer does, but she didn't pity them. Their anxiety was theirs. Her focus was on the sky. The cabin lights flickered briefly as another silhouette passed. Two F-22s appeared side by side, wings perfectly aligned, almost predatory. The sun caught the edges of their fuselage, and for a fleeting moment they gleamed like black diamonds against the blue sky. Hannah's fingers tapped again, silently, in a rhythm only she understood. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't react. But inside, her body tightened, muscles coiled like springs. The quiet girl in seat 14A wasn't quiet by accident. Then the first crackle of static over the radio, faint but unmistakable. She froze, not out of fear, but because she recognized the pattern, the cadence, military but off-channel, informal, urgent. Her hand instinctively slid into her backpack. Her fingers wrapped around a laminated card she hadn't touched in years, a card she'd thought she had left behind in a life that, officially, no longer existed. She traced the edge of it with her thumb, the ink faint but readable. Eagle 1, call sign confirmed. No one on the plane noticed. No one looked up as she subtly adjusted the angle of the card, almost like a chess master moving a piece without revealing her strategy. But Hannah knew the moment the pilots outside had recognized her, not the quiet civilian, but the trained, decorated, and dangerous veteran beneath the hoodie. The air shifted again just slightly. She could sense it, not turbulence, something else, a signal, a recognition, and it was directed at her. She leaned back slightly, closing her eyes again, letting the noise of the cabin fade into white noise. Her heartbeat, however, was loud. Not fear, anticipation. Every training exercise she'd survived, every black sky mission gone wrong, every moment she had walked the line between life and classified death had led to this. A stewardess passed by, unaware, offering drinks. Hannah shook her head politely, but her eyes never left the window, not because she wanted to see the jets, but because she needed to. Every movement, every shadow, every glint of sun on metal was information. Then it happened. One of the F-22s banked slightly, almost imperceptibly. To the casual observer, it was a routine maneuver. To Hannah, it was a signal, recognition, confirmation. They had seen her. The quiet girl in seat 14A had already stopped being invisible. The cabin's chatter continued, oblivious. Phones recorded blurred streaks of light. A child squealed in delight. Adults whispered guesses about air shows, presidential escorts, or military drills. Hannah didn't react. She let her hand rest lightly on the card. She exhaled. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. The invisible mask she had worn for years, the quiet, compliant civilian persona, slid just enough to let the world see the trained, lethal professional she truly was. And then the plane shuddered, not from turbulence, but from an invisible presence, something beyond the normal flight path. She looked out the window, past the first F-22 at the horizon. Her jaw tightened, eyes narrowing. Because she knew it wasn't over. They were waiting for her to respond. And for the first time in years, she wanted to. The cabin's hum, which had been background noise to most passengers, became oppressive to Hannah. Every chatter, every creak of the seats, every metallic clink of the drink cart hitting the floor grated against her awareness. She wasn't nervous, at least not in the conventional sense, but her body hummed with that old, familiar electricity that came with imminent confrontation. She had trained for this kind of moment in simulators, in top-secret programs, in scenarios meant to push humans past their limits. And now, despite being surrounded by oblivious civilians, that training kicked in with mechanical precision. Then came the first shadow. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening in the conventional sense. But it was fast. too fast for any commercial aircraft to keep up with in this space. A streak of polished black steel cut across the horizon outside her window, its angles almost predatory in their precision. Passengers turned, gasped, some laughed nervously. Phones emerged, screens held aloft, but the light barely registered the speed of the object outside. Hannah's hand instinctively rested on the card inside her hoodie, the laminated rectangle that confirmed she wasn't just any passenger, that she had a name pilots still feared and respected. Her fingers pressed it gently, a tactile confirmation that she was ready. Then another streak followed. 2 F-22 Raptors, perfectly synchronized, too perfect. They weren't escorting the plane, they were signaling, and Hannah, for reasons no one else could see, recognized it immediately. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her jaw locking. Every instinct screamed, do not panic, do not react, observe, wait. A child shrieked. A phone slipped from a nervous passenger's hand. A man muttered, "Are they military?" "Yes," she whispered, almost to herself. Her voice was calm, almost mundane, but it carried a weight that belied its simplicity. She tilted her head slightly, catching the sun glinting off the wing of one of the jets. It was a signature move, subtle but precise, and she immediately understood its message. Recognition. Identification. She wasn't a civilian, not really, not in their eyes. The first stewardess passed by, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing, offering drinks and a reassuring smile. Hannah gave a polite shake of her head, keeping her eyes fixed forward. She couldn't let them see. Not yet. Outside, the Raptors banked, wings slicing the air in perfect arcs. One of them flashed just enough to catch the sun, sending a reflection straight to her eyes. Hannah narrowed her gaze. She had flown alongside these jets before. She had been inside them, behind the controls, in situations so classified they didn't even appear on the books. And now, from the safety, or illusion of safety, of a commercial cabin, she was being recognized. A ripple of unease moved through the plane. Passengers whispered, speculated. "Are we in trouble?" one woman asked. Hannah ignored her. She didn't answer. She didn't need to, she simply observed. Every movement of the jets was a sentence. Every flare of exhaust, every bank, every angle told a story. And the story was clear. They know you, Hannah Cross. They know you are here. She pressed her fingers lightly on the card again, tracing the words she hadn't spoken in years. Eagle One. It had been her call sign during her most dangerous missions, the ones the public would never hear about. Missions that had tested the limits of human endurance, that had cost lives, that had been wiped from official records. Now, a signal from the sky, subtle yet unmistakable, confirmed that the men flying those Raptors remembered. A man, too, rose ahead, tried to film the jets with his phone, but his hand shook violently. The image captured was a blur, a streak of black across a blue sky. He cursed under his breath, frustration mingling with fear. No one understood that the jets were not just moving, they were communicating. Hannah's gaze followed them as they performed maneuvers that would have taken professional pilots months to master. Only, these weren't demonstrations. They were messages, precise and urgent. She tapped her fingers lightly on the armrest, a rhythm only she understood, a code she had created years ago when communication needed to be silent, invisible, untraceable. The tapping was subtle enough to pass as nervous habit, but inside her mind was calculating every trajectory, every speed, every wingtip vortex. The cabin crew began whispering to one another, unease growing. They didn't know why. They only felt the tension, the shift in atmosphere. The plane itself seemed to vibrate, not from the engines, but from the recognition in the air outside. Then a sharp static cut through the cabin, not the captain's voice, not a friendly announcement. Raw, urgent, military. Hannah stiffened. She had heard that cadence before, during exercises that simulated life-or-death encounters in hostile territory. The words weren't clear at first, buried beneath interference, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone was reaching for her. Her hand slid subtly under her hoodie, fingers wrapping around the card again. She drew it out just enough to read it, to remind herself of the truth she had kept buried. Eagle 1. Recognition. Response. The connection was alive again, decades later, in the middle of an ordinary passenger flight. She exhaled slowly, calmly, not for the passengers, not for the crew, but for herself. She needed to center. Her training had taught her that in moments like these, hesitation could be fatal, not necessarily for her, but for the people she was about to protect. A stewardess passed again, offering water. Hannah shook her head, lips pressing into a firm line. The woman moved on, unaware of the storm barely restrained outside the fuselage. Outside, the first Raptor moved closer. Too close. Not threateningly, but intentionally. Its wing tip tilted slightly, a precise angle that spoke of respect, acknowledgement, and challenge. Hannah's pulse synchronized with the engine's hum. She knew instinctively that the pilot inside the jet had seen the card, understood her position, and was waiting for her next move. Her fingers tapped lightly on the laminated surface, tracing the edges. She didn't need to speak, yet. Her presence was enough. The F-22s adjusted their formation, perfectly synchronized, their movement a silent conversation with her. Passengers were now openly staring, whispers rising to audible concern. Phones captured blur after blur. Children pressed faces to windows, squealing in awe, but Hannah didn't look at them. She looked outward, toward the horizon, toward the jets, toward recognition that had never faded. She exhaled once more, a controlled breath. Inside, her chest tightened with anticipation, the same tension she had felt during countless covert missions, high-risk flights and operations that had tested the limits of human skill and courage. She was no longer just a passenger. She was a participant, an operator, a key player in a game no one else in the cabin could even perceive. The static returned, louder this time, closer, insistent. The voice tried again, broken by interference. Hannah's eyes narrowed, focusing, absorbing. Every word, every nuance, every missed syllable mattered. She knew the pilots outside were waiting for her to respond. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the first jet made a subtle shift, one wing dipping slightly, almost imperceptibly to untrained eyes. But she saw it. She felt it. The signal was unmistakable, identification confirmed, response required. Hannah's jaw clenched. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a small, deliberate movement, fingers adjusting the card in her hand, breath steady, posture straightening. She wasn't the quiet girl in 14A anymore. She was something else entirely. The passengers didn't notice. They were absorbed in the spectacle, in their own fears and fascinations. But Hannah knew the truth. The quiet, unassuming civilian they saw was a mask. Beneath it lay a pilot, a warrior, a professional whose skills had been erased from public knowledge but never from memory. The cabin lights flickered faintly as another streak of black appeared outside, another jet, joining the first two. They were closing in, forming a triangle, positioning themselves with exacting precision around the plane. The hum of the engines, the faint whine of turbines, the subtle vibration through the fuselage, all combined into a signal Hannah could read like an open book. She pressed the card lightly against her chest, a small anchor in the chaos. Then she looked out the window, eyes sharp, mind racing. She knew the moment had come when she could no longer remain invisible. Because the first shadow was only the beginning. And whatever waited next was about to force her to reveal the truth. The cabin had settled into an uneasy rhythm, a false sense of normalcy. Phones were out, children were gaping at the sky, and passengers whispered theories about airshows or secret VIP flights. Yet Hannah Cross sat motionless, a statue in seat 14A, her gaze fixed beyond the glass. Her hoodie shadowed her eyes, hiding the intensity that burned behind them. The F-22s were no longer distant streaks. They were close enough that the subtle vibrations of their engines could be felt through the fuselage, an almost imperceptible hum beneath the ordinary roar of the commercial jet. Each movement they made, each tilt of a wing, Each flare of sunlight off a polished fuselage was deliberate, a silent dialogue meant for her alone. Then it happened. A sharp burst of static crackled through the cabin's intercom. Not the captain, not the flight attendants. A voice, low and clipped, cut through the hum. Military, urgent, raw. Civilian aircraft, do you copy? The static swallowed the rest, leaving only fragments. Yet Hannah didn't need clarity. The pattern, the cadence, the timing, it was unmistakable. She had trained for these moments, lived through them. That voice was reaching her specifically, testing, probing, acknowledging. Her hand slid beneath the hoodie, brushing the laminated card she had carried for years, a relic of a life erased from public knowledge. Eagle One. The words were faint but indelible. Her fingers lingered over the edges, steadying herself. She wasn't nervous. She was focused. A flight attendant passed by, pausing to offer water to a nearby passenger. Hannah shook her head politely, her eyes never leaving the window. The plane moved forward as usual, but in that controlled interior, a silent storm was building, one the passengers couldn't perceive. The static returned, louder, sharper, and more insistent. Civilian 58 Alpha, respond, repeat, respond. Hannah's jaw tightened. She recognized the urgency in the voice, even through the interference. Every syllable, every pause carried layers of meaning that only someone who had flown alongside these pilots or been them could decode. The F-22s weren't just close, they were waiting for her, testing her, challenging her. She leaned forward slightly, fingers pressing against the card. Her eyes narrowed. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't coincidence. The jets had found her. The pilots had recognized her call sign. They were acknowledging a past they weren't supposed to remember, a life they had sworn secrecy about. Her pulse steadied, controlled. She allowed herself a single deep breath, the kind used to center in moments of extreme precision. Years of classified missions, covert operations, and high-stakes maneuvers had trained her for this. The difference now was the audience, oblivious civilians, a rattled cabin crew, and the silent sky filled with deadly machines recognizing her presence. From outside, one of the F-22s adjusted its formation, moving closer. Its wing dipped slightly in a deliberate signal. Hannah's eyes sharpened. She knew instantly that this wasn't casual maneuvering. This was communication, a coded acknowledgement that she was no longer just another passenger. She tapped her fingers lightly on the card, a subtle rhythm that had been a private code in the past. Tap, tap, tap. Each beat a signal of readiness, presence, recognition. It was as if she were speaking without words, telling them she understood, that she was prepared, that she was on the channel. The passengers whispered among themselves. Are they military escorts? Is this safe? Phones captured streaks of black against the azure sky, but none of them could see the subtle choreography, the invisible conversation unfolding outside. Hannah's focus intensified. She could feel the jet's energy in the air, the vibrations through the fuselage, the subtle pull on the plane's trajectory caused by the airflow of the Raptors as they carved their pattern around her aircraft. Every instinct she had cultivated over years, every simulation, every Black Ops mission, told her exactly what was happening. Then the voice came again, sharper, breaking through static. Civilian aircraft, identify yourself, confirm call sign. The cabin froze. Even the flight attendants stiffened, hands gripping trays, eyes darting nervously. A man nearby muttered, "What is happening?" Hannah's hand rose subtly, adjusting the headset she had brought from the safety of invisibility into action. She had kept it folded in her bag, unused for years, and now its time had come. She slipped it over her ears with the same precision she once used before flying a fighter jet. Her fingers rested lightly on the microphone. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she observed. The F-22s outside had slowed slightly, wings tilting in near-perfect synchronization, holding formation. They were waiting. She could feel it in her bones. Recognition demanded response. Hesitation was not an option. She exhaled, slow and deliberate. And then, almost automatically, her lips parted and the words came, steady and clear. Raptor Flight, this is Civilian 58 Alpha, responding as Eagle 1. The effect was instantaneous. The jets adjusted again, flaring their afterburners, engines screaming in a controlled display of raw power. The sky seemed to vibrate. In the headset, the silence was deafening. Then, finally, a voice, steady but laden with disbelief and recognition. "Confirm call sign." Hannah's jaw tightened. "Confirmed," she said, her voice calm, authoritative, the weight of years of experience condensed into a single syllable. The F-22s reacted instantly. They shifted into perfect formation around her plane, acknowledging the return signal. Outside, the sunlight glinted off their fuselages like liquid metal, reflecting patterns that the naked eye could barely discern. Every movement carried a weight of respect, a recognition of a life that had been erased from official records but never from memory. Back in the cabin, the ordinary world continued obliviously. Phones captured blurry streaks. Children pressed faces to windows, squealing in delight. A woman muttered to her companion, "I didn't know we'd see jets today." But Hannah didn't notice them. They didn't matter. All that mattered was the air, the jets, the silent exchange of acknowledgement. She could feel the weight of their gaze, even without seeing their faces. She had been trained to sense attention in all its forms, to read intent in subtle movements. And right now, every fiber of the sky's tension was focused on her. Her fingers rested lightly on the laminated card, a small anchor against the rising tide of adrenaline. Her pulse was steady, her breathing controlled. She had faced far more dangerous situations before, black sky missions with impossible odds, mechanical failures at supersonic speeds, life-or-death decisions made in split seconds. But never had she experienced a confrontation so surreal, so immediate, so hidden in plain sight. The static returned, urgent again, a test of her readiness. Civilian aircraft maintain frequency, respond immediately. Hannah's eyes narrowed. She could feel the moment tightening like a coiled spring. The Raptor formation outside was no longer just a display. It was an interrogation, a challenge, a signal that they were prepared for her next move. She adjusted the headset, fingers brushing the card one last time. This was no longer observation. This was participation, and the quiet girl in seat 14A had just been forced to step out of invisibility. The cabin crew whispered anxiously among themselves, unaware of the true stakes. A phone fell from a man's hand. A child pressed a sticky palm against the window. Everyone was caught in the spectacle, but none of them understood the silent recognition, the conversation happening at speeds and angles beyond human comprehension. Hannah exhaled again, slow and deliberate. The next words she would speak would change everything. She knew that once she responded fully, she could not retreat. She could not hide. She could not pretend. And then, just as she opened her mouth, the plane shuddered, not from turbulence but from an unseen force. The Raptors had shifted again, their movements precise, signaling that the next step was critical. Her fingers gripped the card tighter. Her eyes, hidden beneath the shadow of her hoodie, burned with focus. The quiet passenger was gone. Eagle 1 was awake. And for the first time in years, the sky demanded her full attention. The cabin was tense. Not the usual airline tension, the kind that comes with delayed flights or crying children, but a deeper, almost imperceptible energy that hummed through the air. Passengers whispered nervously, but Hannah Cross didn't hear them. Her focus was entirely outside the window, on the streaks of black slicing across the sky, her mind tracing the impossible paths of the F-22s as if reading a book no one else could see. Her heartbeat was steady, measured, every muscle in her body primed, every nerve taut. Years of training had prepared her for this, but never in a scenario so surreal. Seated among civilians, carrying nothing more threatening than a backpack and a laminated card, yet being observed by the most advanced fighter jets in the world. The static came again, louder, clearer, insistent. Civilian aircraft, identify yourself. Respond immediately, deviation detected. The cabin flinched at the crackle of urgency. Phones were lifted, hands gripped armrests. Children clutched parents' arms. Hannah's fingers pressed lightly against the card inside her hoodie. The name printed there wasn't just a call sign. It was a history of missions, of life-and-death decisions, of skill and instinct refined under pressure most people couldn't comprehend. Her lips parted slightly, not to speak yet but to center herself. She had to move carefully, strategically. One wrong motion could spook the pilots, trigger unintended maneuvers, or, worse, draw attention to the wrong passengers. And then the first real sign that the jets were taking the situation seriously. One of the F-22s banked low, too low for casual formation flying. Its shadow stretched across the fuselage, long and deliberate, like a predator acknowledging prey it didn't intend to strike yet. Hannah's chest tightened, not with fear but anticipation. She had been here before, in simulators and in classified skis, when precision mattered more than anything. Her eyes flicked to the captain, who had just returned from the cockpit with a concerned expression. He looked between her and the static-spewing headset. "Ma'am, you need to sit down," he said, his voice clipped, tense. Hannah shook her head subtly. "I need the radio," she said, her tone calm, unassuming, but weighted with an authority no airline crew could ignore. The captain froze. A nervous laugh escaped him, half humor, half disbelief. "You caw." "I need it," she interrupted, voice firm. There was no room for negotiation. He hesitated, scanning the cabin, his eyes catching the F-22s for the first time. The jets were close enough now that their aerodynamic precision was evident even from a passenger plane. Engines flared, afterburners glinting in the sunlight. The captain's hand trembled as he handed over the headset. Hannah adjusted it carefully, slipping it over her ears. The world narrowed to sound, to vibration, to intention. The static came again, a mechanical heartbeat urging her to respond. Outside, the jets mirrored the pulse of the static. They were communicating in maneuvers so precise that only someone trained in fighter operations could truly interpret them. One wing dipped, then another. A slight roll, a subtle flare, recognition, challenge, invitation. Hannah exhaled slowly. The quiet passenger persona dissolved like mist. Her fingers pressed the laminated card to her chest. The words "Eagle One" were more than ink on plastic. They were an identity, a legacy, a history of excellence erased from public knowledge but never from memory. She keyed the mic. Her voice, when it came, was calm, steady, and unmistakable. "Raptor Flight, this is Civilian 58 Alpha, responding as Eagle One." The effect was immediate. The jets adjusted formation, engines flaring as if acknowledging her presence. A silent rhythm passed between them, a conversation of movements and signals, invisible to all but the trained eye. The cabin erupted in murmurs. A stewardess dropped her tray in surprise. Phones were lifted again, capturing streaks of black against blue, but Hannah didn't notice. She didn't care. She had stepped into a world the passengers would never comprehend. The static voice returned, sharper, more insistent. "Confirm call sign. Repeat, confirm." "Confirmed," she said, her voice firm, resonant. It carried decades of authority, of experience, of skills honed under extreme pressure. Outside, one jet dipped low, close enough that sunlight reflected sharply against its fuselage. The pilot's eyes, if anyone could see them, were locked on hers. Recognition, respect, challenge. They were waiting for her next move, signaling that the situation required precision, not panic. The passengers had no idea. To them, this was a spectacle, a moment of thrill, maybe fear. But they could not see what Hannah saw: the subtle aerodynamic signatures, the calculated distances, the invisible dialogue between pilot and pilot, sky to sky. Her hand rested on the card again, a tactile anchor in a storm of adrenaline. Every muscle in her body was tense, ready to react, ready to guide. She was not just a passenger. She was a trained operator, capable of reading the sky, reading the jets, and commanding respect in a world designed to obscure her very existence. The captain's face was pale, eyes darting nervously between the headset in her hands and the jets outside. "Ma'am, we caw." "Just listen," she said quietly, almost kindly. Her voice carried calm precision. "We don't have time for confusion." And then it happened. One of the jets broke formation slightly, moving ahead and tilting sharply. To the untrained eye, it could have been a casual adjustment, but Hannah knew better. The movement was deliberate, a test of response, an assertion of presence, a probe. Her fingers tapped lightly on the card, a subtle rhythm that had been her private code in the past. Tap, 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 each beat a signal of readiness, presence, awareness. She was telling them silently, "I am here, I am ready, I understand." The static intensified. Eagle 1 deviation detected, immediate guidance required. Hannah's eyes narrowed. She inhaled deeply, centering herself. Her voice came again, steady, authoritative. "Copy, stabilizing, adjusting course. Maintain altitude." The jets flared again, engines screaming in acknowledgement. They had recognized her authority. She had stepped into their world, and they were responding as they always did to pilots who could operate at their level. The passengers remained oblivious, captivated by streaks in the sky, unaware that they were witnessing the reemergence of a legend, the return of a trained operator from anonymity to action. Children pressed faces to windows, squealing. Adults whispered theories. No one understood the depth of the operation unfolding inches from their seats. Hannah's hand pressed the card again, a grounding gesture. The sky outside was a battlefield of signals, precision, and recognition. She felt the energy of the jets, the silent acknowledgement, the invisible communication that carried weight beyond the visible spectrum. And then, a movement she had not anticipated. One of the F-22s banked sharply, descending toward the plane almost dangerously. The pilot's intention was clear to Hannah, a direct test, a challenge, a silent demand that she act decisively. Her pulse remained steady. She could feel the tension, the rhythm of engines, the subtle vibrations through the fuselage, the tiny shifts in air pressure. Everything was precise. Everything mattered. She adjusted the headset, fingers brushing the card one last time. This was it. The quiet girl in seat 14A was gone. The operator, the warrior, the pilot, Eagle One, was awake. She was about to step fully into action. And the world around her, the oblivious passengers, the nervous crew, the sky itself, was about to change. Because in the next moment, nothing would remain ordinary. Hannah Cross's fingers brushed the laminated card one last time, grounding herself in the weight of the name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Eagle One. Her lips parted and she spoke, not as a passenger, not as a quiet girl in seat 14A, but as a trained operator, a warrior whose every instinct had been honed to precision. "Raptor Flight, this is Civilian 58 Alpha, responding as Eagle One," she said, steady, controlled. The effect was instantaneous. The F-22s outside adjusted formation with a precision that bordered on choreography. Engines flared, sunlight glinting off the angular fuselage like black diamonds, reflecting patterns only visible to the trained eye. Every movement was deliberate, a silent acknowledgement, a recognition of the name she had carried for decades. The static over the headset paused, as if the sky itself had stopped to listen. Then a voice, low and reverent, came through. "Confirm call sign. Repeat, confirm." "Confirmed," she replied, calm and authoritative, her voice carrying decades of experience in a single syllable. The jets responded instantly, one banking sharply, another flaring its afterburner in acknowledgement. Hannah's pulse didn't race. Her body didn't tremble. She had been in worse situations, missions where life and death balanced on a razor-thin edge, where split-second decisions could save or destroy. But this was different. This was the invisible stage, the world unaware, passengers oblivious, yet the sky itself a battlefield of recognition and protocol. The captain, still pale from witnessing the exchange, murmured, "What who?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. There was no time for explanations, only actions. Her eyes flicked to the window, tracking the jet's precise movements. One Raptor dipped slightly, signaling a need for guidance. Another tilted, probing for confirmation. Hannah keyed the mic again, her voice measured and deliberate. "Maintain altitude. Adjust course by 3 degrees starboard. Monitor turbulence from wingtip vortices. Confirm when stable." The jets flared again, engines screaming in synchronization, a visible and audible acknowledgement of her instructions. Outside, the sky became a chessboard of precision maneuvers. The passengers saw streaks of black against blue, some craning their necks, some fumbling with phones. None understood the conversation unfolding at speeds and altitudes beyond comprehension. Hannah's fingers drummed lightly on the card, a silent rhythm. Years ago, she had developed subtle tactile signals to communicate in silence, in moments where words were too slow or impossible. Tap, tap, tap. Each movement deliberate, each beat a message. She was speaking without sound, guiding the pilots with micro gestures and instinct. The static returned, urgent and insistent. Deviation detected, immediate response required. Hannah's eyes narrowed. She could feel the jets, their energy in the air, the aerodynamic pressure, the subtle adjustments they were making to test her. Every second was critical. One misstep, one hesitation, could turn this demonstration of recognition into disaster. She inhaled slowly. Then with perfect precision she spoke. "Copy stabilizing, vector adjusted, maintaining formation, confirm visual on both Raptors." The F-22s responded instantly, flaring and dipping as if dancing to a rhythm only Hannah could hear. Outside, their angular wings carved arcs in the sky, precise, lethal, and breathtaking. Inside, the passengers remained oblivious. Phones captured blurry streaks. Children squealed, fascinated. Adults whispered guesses. None of them could see the silent ballet, the invisible exchange, the recognition of a legendary pilot who had been erased from the world but never forgotten by those trained to see her. The captain, eyes wide, muttered, "She's controlling them from here, from a passenger seat." Hannah ignored him. Every instinct screamed focus. The cards, the call sign, the jets, they were all part of a protocol she had lived and breathed. And now, decades later, the training, the memory, the name, all converged into this single moment. Then the first test arrived. One jet moved sharply, dangerously close to the commercial plane. The pilot was signaling, not attacking, but requesting a demonstration of control, precision, and authority. A challenge. Hannah's fingers tightened on the card briefly, a grounding gesture. She keyed the mic. "Maintain safe distance. Adjust altitude by 100 feet, then starboard heading. Stabilize vector. Confirm visual on all aircraft." The response was immediate. The jet flared its afterburner, banking with razor-sharp accuracy. Another mirrored the move. Recognition, respect, acknowledgement. The passengers murmured again, some craning their necks, others holding phones to catch the jets. A stewardess whispered, "Are these part of the military?" Hannah didn't respond. She didn't need to. Outside, the ballet continued. The jets traced arcs and patterns visible only to trained eyes, a silent conversation, a display of recognition, of respect, of history. Her mind raced through decades of training, black sky operations, missions erased from public records. She visualized the trajectories, calculated the airflow, monitored the wings, subtle adjustments. Every flick of aileron, every engine flare was a word in a sentence she had been waiting decades to speak aloud. And then the moment arrived. One of the F-22s banked low, tipping its wing in a sharp, deliberate salute. A gesture of recognition, of respect, of acknowledgement reserved for the few who had earned it in the skies. Hannah's eyes glistened, though she didn't move. Her pulse remained steady, but a flood of emotion surged. Relief, pride, nostalgia, and a bitter recognition of the years lost to secrecy. The static voice returned, this time calmer, tinged with awe. Eagle 1 guidance confirmed. Stabilization complete. We did not expect. Hannah cut it off gently, voice calm and commanding. Focus, maintain formation, end of message. The jets responded, flaring once more, engines screaming, then falling back slightly to maintain a stable, safe distance. The message was received, the acknowledgement made. The silent history of the skis revived in an instant. Inside the cabin, no one noticed the magnitude. A woman clutched her child. A man muttered about awesome jets. Phones captured streaks of black. But the real drama, the conversation, the recognition, the return of a legendary pilot remained invisible. Hannah exhaled slowly. The card rested lightly in her hand. Her body relaxed slightly, but her mind stayed sharp. The jets would remain in formation until the plane reached the edge of their operational zone, but the message had been delivered. She had responded. She had asserted her presence. She had reclaimed the name that defined her, Eagle 1. The captain looked at her, stunned. I don't know what just happened, he said, voice trembling. Hannah simply shook her head, eyes still fixed on the window. She didn't need to explain. No one could understand, not truly. The sky had seen her, acknowledged her, and that was enough. And yet, she knew this was only the beginning. The F-22s would remain close, watching, waiting. The world below remained oblivious. But Hannah could feel it. The next move, the next challenge, the next test was already forming. The moment of invisibility, of anonymity had ended. She was no longer just a passenger. She was Eagle 1, recognized by the few who mattered, observed by the many who couldn't. Her pulse steadied. Her fingers pressed the card once more. The next part of the flight would not be ordinary. Because in the sky, legends never fade. They simply wait for the right moment to reassert themselves. Hannah Cross adjusted the headset on her ears, the static of the communication fading into the background as her focus sharpened. She could feel the vibrations of the F-22s outside, each a silent question, each movement a word in a language only she could read. Yet as she guided the jets through subtle course corrections, her mind drifted backward, not to yesterday or even last week, but to a time that had defined her entire existence. The time before she was forced into obscurity, before she became the quiet girl in 14A. She remembered her first flight in a fighter jet. The roar of engines, the suffocating pressure of acceleration, the way the G-forces pushed her into her seat with a force that felt like it could crush bone. She was just 19, raw talent, a mind wired for precision, a body trained for endurance. Yet she was also reckless, audacious, willing to test the limits because she had to. Her instructors had watched her take risks no other pilot would, and when she emerged unscathed, they called it brilliance. Brilliance, it had cost her more than she realized. Her career had skyrocketed quickly, faster than anyone expected. She was the first female lead in the Raptor test program, a position that put her in direct contact with the most advanced aircraft in the world. Every maneuver she made, every flight she piloted, was a high-stakes test of physics, engineering, and instinct. She had survived black sky operations where failure wasn't just dangerous, it was unrecorded, unacknowledged, invisible to the public and even to her peers. Missions classified beyond the top secret level, lives saved and lost in silence. And then came the mission that changed everything. A covert operation over foreign territory. The jet had faltered mid-flight. A navigation system had gone offline, leaving her in a void where error was death. Her squadron had watched on monitors, waiting for the impossible outcome. And she had delivered. Against impossible odds, she had navigated a failing aircraft back to friendly airspace, saving lives on the ground below and maintaining the integrity of the mission. When she landed, she was a hero to those who knew, but to the world she had vanished. A bureaucratic decision erased her from operational rosters, her name scrubbed from reports, her accomplishments classified and buried. The only recognition she received was the silent respect of the few who had flown alongside her. The only acknowledgement, subtle gestures in private hangars, coded messages in flight patterns, call signs whispered across frequencies she could still remember. And now, decades later, those gestures were alive again. The F-22s outside were not just following her instructions, they were saluting her history. She was Eagle One, the pilot who had survived missions that were considered impossible, who had mastered jets that defied human limits. The passengers in the cabin remained blissfully unaware, their fascination with streaks of black across the blue sky utterly superficial. They had no idea that the calm, composed passenger they saw in seat 14A was a woman who had stared into death countless times, who had navigated through chaos with nothing but instinct and intellect. Hannah's gaze softened for a brief moment, thinking of those lost missions, the colleagues who had never returned, the lives she had saved. Recognition from the pilots outside was not just validation, it was remembrance. It was acknowledgement that the sacrifices, the isolation, the erasure of her identity had not been in vain. Her mind returned to the present. The static had returned, sharper this time, almost impatient. The pilots were still waiting, still testing, still reading her every micro-movement. Outside, the F-22s mirrored her thoughts, their movements reflecting acknowledgement, respect, and a subtle challenge. She spoke again, calm and authoritative. Eagle One guiding. Maintain formation. Check vectors at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. Adjust altitude by 20 feet incrementally. Confirm visual on all aircraft. Instantly, the jets responded. One flared, another banked slightly, all in perfect synchronization. The silent dialogue between trained pilots was in full swing, a conversation invisible to the untrained eye but vivid in precision and timing. And yet, amidst the precision and control, Hannah's mind wandered to the life she had left behind, years of solitude, years of civilian invisibility, years pretending she was just another passenger, just another face in a sea of anonymity. She had chosen this obscurity because it kept her safe, because it allowed her to survive without constantly being monitored, evaluated, or judged. But the call of the sky, the pull of recognition, had never left her. The jets seemed to sense her reflection, her hesitation, her memory. One of the F-22s rolled slightly, an almost imperceptible motion, a reminder that the sky remembered too. The pilots recognized not only her skill but also the weight she carried. Each maneuver was a silent question. Are you ready to return to what you were? Hannah's eyes hardened. She pressed the card lightly to her chest again. I am ready. The static voice came again, steady now, almost awed. Eagle One, we didn't expect. Guidance requested. Your experience is unprecedented. Her lips curved slightly, a small smile, though she didn't relax. She responded with precision. Maintain current course. Monitor airspeed. All vectors confirmed. Adjust heading by 5 degrees north. Stabilize turbulence from crosswind. The jets outside mirrored her commands flawlessly, the dance continuing with lethal grace. Each movement, each flare, each banking angle was recognition of a lifetime of expertise, a testament to the woman sitting silently in seat 14A. The passengers whispered, some holding onto the armrests, some filming blurred streaks of black. None of them could understand the narrative unfolding in the air around them, a legend stepping briefly back into the world, a history of excellence brushing against the oblivious present. Hannah's mind wandered briefly to the first day she had been grounded, the day she had been told her career was over, her accomplishments erased. She had felt rage then, betrayal, isolation. But today, in this moment, she felt something else: affirmation, recognition, the silent acknowledgement of those who truly understood her, the few who had seen her brilliance, her courage, her capacity to navigate chaos without losing control. And then a subtle shift occurred. One of the F-22s dipped slightly lower, engines roaring in a controlled flare signaling respect. Another executed a precise roll, maintaining perfect formation. The message was clear: we remember, we respect, we acknowledge. Hannah exhaled slowly, letting the emotion settle. She knew the passengers would never understand, would never see the magnitude of what was happening outside the window, but she didn't need them to. The sky had acknowledged her. The pilots had recognized her, and that was enough. Yet as the jets maintained formation, a new awareness crept in. Recognition had consequences. Every maneuver, every signal, every acknowledgement drew attention. The world was still watching, even if the passengers weren't. Someone somewhere could be monitoring frequencies, analyzing flight paths, and noticing the unusual presence of advanced jets so close to a commercial plane. Hannah pressed the card to her chest one final time, feeling the weight of her identity, her history, and her skills converge in the moment. She had stepped out of invisibility, reclaimed her call sign, and been acknowledged by those who mattered. But the sky was far from ordinary, and the next moments would demand more than recognition. They would demand action. The static faded slightly, replaced by the low hum of engines and the subtle vibration of the plane in the sky. But Hannah knew the calm was temporary. The F-22s were watching, waiting, testing, and she, Eagle One, was ready. Because who she used to be was not gone. She had merely been quiet. Now she would move. The cabin of Flight 5897 hummed with the ordinary drone of commercial air travel. Children pressed sticky faces to windows. Phones recorded streaks of black that the passengers assumed were military jets performing a show. A stewardess passed down the aisle, offering water, oblivious to the invisible storm outside. But Hannah Cross in seat 14A knew the truth. Every vibration through the fuselage, every minute shift in air pressure, every glint of sunlight reflecting off the polished fuselages of the F-22 Raptors told her a story the passengers could never perceive. She adjusted her headset, her fingers lightly brushing the laminated card in her hoodie pocket. Eagle One. The name had survived decades of silence, erasure, and obscurity. The pilots outside had recognized her. Now, the time had come for acknowledgement. The lead Raptor dipped slightly, a movement so precise it could have been invisible to anyone who hadn't been trained to read it. It was subtle, a silent signal, but Hannah understood. It was a salute, not just of respect for skill, but for survival, for history, for the woman who had flown through black sky missions, through life-and-death decisions, and had returned unbroken. Her heart remained steady. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself. Years of training had taught her that emotions could betray control, and control was essential. Yet beneath the calm exterior, a flicker of pride, long suppressed, long denied, rose within her. Another jet flared its engines, banking sharply in tandem with the first. The dance was unmistakable now. The jets were forming a ceremonial pattern, a mid-air acknowledgement orchestrated for one purpose: to recognize the return of a legendary pilot to the sky she had mastered. Hannah tapped the card lightly against her chest. Her fingers felt the edges, familiar and grounding. She could feel the pilots reading her presence as clearly as she could read theirs. They had expected hesitation. They had tested precision, and she had responded. Then the voice came over the headset, calm, almost reverent. Eagle One, all pilots, salute confirmed. Your presence acknowledged. Permission granted to guide formation. Hannah exhaled. Permission granted. The words were simple but carried decades of unspoken respect. This was no ordinary acknowledgement. It was the culmination of every mission, every risk, every moment she had spent mastering aircraft that defied human limits. She spoke into the headset, voice steady and authoritative. Copy, maintain formation. Adjust vector to 100 feet starboard. Stabilize turbulence. The jets responded instantly, flaring and banking with precise timing. Outside, their angular wings reflected sunlight in arcs so perfect they could have been carved with a ruler. Every movement was a salute, every engine flare a nod to her history, to her skill, to her unbroken presence. Inside the cabin, the passengers whispered excitedly, oblivious to the meaning of what they saw. Phones captured streaks, blurred arcs across blue sky, but none could perceive the significance. The salute of the most advanced fighter jets in the world, performed for a single passenger who was no ordinary civilian. Hannah's gaze softened as she watched the Raptor formation move in tandem. She remembered the first jet she had flown alone, the first mission that had demanded impossible precision, the first time she had faced life-or-death decisions without anyone watching. Recognition had been rare then, often silent, but now it was overt, undeniable, and breathtaking. Her pulse remained steady, but her mind raced with strategy. The salute was not just ceremonial, it was also functional. Every maneuver, every bank, every subtle change in formation communicated instructions, warnings, and alignment checks. The pilots outside were allowing her to guide them, but also testing her precision, her readiness, her capacity to command in a situation that could turn dangerous in an instant. She keyed the mic again. Raptor flight, maintain elevation, hold formation at 1.5 miles, confirm visual on all aircraft, salute acknowledged, prepare to disengage in 30 seconds unless further instruction received. The jets responded instantly, adjusting their flight patterns with a precision that left her breathless. Engines flared, angular wings tipped, and sunlight bounced off their fuselages like liquid steel. The salute was complete, undeniable, and extraordinary, a rare acknowledgement in the most secretive circles of military aviation. Hannah leaned back slightly, fingers resting on the card. She had not expected this, not in the midst of a commercial flight, surrounded by passengers who had no idea what was happening. But the acknowledgement carried more than recognition. It carried closure, validation, and the silent affirmation that her decades of skill and sacrifice had not been forgotten. Yet the tension had not passed. Outside, the lead Raptor dipped one final time, engines roaring, wings slicing the air with lethal elegance. The movement was ceremonial, but also a reminder. The sky is never truly calm, and recognition does not erase the need for vigilance. Hannah's eyes narrowed. She keyed the mic once more, voice calm but assertive. Confirm disengagement. Maintain escort until airspace is clear. All systems monitored. The jets adjusted, flaring and banking in perfect synchronization. The salute had been performed. Acknowledgement granted. The unseen audience, the pilots who knew her history, had recognized her fully. Inside the cabin, passengers clapped, mistaking the display for an air show. Children squealed. Phones recorded streaks that would become social media clips, trending for hours, but Hannah barely noticed. Her mind was focused, alert, prepared. The salute was over, but the engagement was not. Her fingers brushed the laminated card again, feeling the words Eagle 1. The name had survived erasure, secrecy, and decades of civilian life. It was alive again, recognized not by the masses, but by those who had understood her from the start. The static returned on the headset, faint this time. A final check, a final confirmation. Eagle 1 formation stable, guidance effective, salute complete, recognition eternal. Hannah exhaled fully this time, the first release of tension in what felt like decades. She allowed herself a moment of quiet pride, though she remained vigilant. The salute was a closure, a testament, and a rekindling of the identity she had carried in silence for so long. Outside, the F-22s maintained formation for a few more moments, engines flaring in near-perfect symmetry, before gently peeling away, leaving Flight 5897 to continue its journey under the guise of ordinary travel. Hannah leaned back, her hand still resting on the card. She had been the quiet girl in Seat 14A, invisible to the world, erased from public knowledge, living a life of ordinary anonymity. But the sky had remembered. The pilots had recognized her. She had reclaimed her name, her history, her skill. And for the first time in decades, she felt complete. Yet even in that moment of triumph, she knew the truth. The world was watching. The sky was unpredictable, and there were consequences to being recognized. The salute had ended, but the story was far from over. Because the quiet girl in seat 14A was gone. In her place sat a legend, reborn, recognized, and ready for whatever came next. The first hints of evening brushed the horizon, painting the sky in molten gold and deepening blues as Flight 5897 began its gradual descent toward Logan International Airport. Inside the cabin, the hum of conversation rose and fell like a tide. Passengers leaned against windows, still pointing at fading streaks of black across the sky, thinking it had all been some military spectacle. Phones flashed, videos capturing arcs of sunlight bouncing off the F-22s in dramatic streaks. Hannah Cross in seat 14A remained calm, her hands lightly resting on the laminated card tucked in her hoodie. Eagle 1. The name had survived decades of silence, erasure, and civilian invisibility. Now, after a mid-air acknowledgement few could comprehend, she carried it again with quiet dignity, fully aware that the world outside had no idea what had just transpired. Her eyes scanned the cabin briefly. Children whispered excitedly, parents laughed nervously, and a flight attendant still clutched a tray, pale-faced from the near-ceremonial drama that had unfolded outside. None of them understood. None of them could understand. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The static had vanished from the headset now, replaced by the soft murmur of the aircraft's engines. The F-22s had peeled off in perfect synchrony, banking once, twice, and then accelerating into the horizon. A silent salute, their wings angled perfectly, was the final acknowledgement. The message was complete. Her presence had been recognized, her skills validated, her identity fully reclaimed. Yet even in the calm, her instincts remained taut, primed for any unexpected movement. She had spent a lifetime operating under the assumption that the skis could turn lethal in a fraction of a second. The salute, magnificent as it had been, was not a guarantee of safety. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom, hesitant, tinged with awe. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a special escort today. Please remain seated. You'll be landing shortly." Hannah smiled faintly but didn't relax. Her eyes, sharp and focused, tracked the horizon where the black streaks of F-22s had disappeared. Recognition had been granted, but attention had also been drawn. Someone could be watching, analyzing, monitoring. It was a small risk, but in her life, risk was never far away. As the plane began its slow descent, her mind drifted back, briefly, to the missions she had lived, the high-risk flights, the black sky operations where failure wasn't just dangerous, it was invisible. The friends she had lost, the lives she had saved, the history erased from public knowledge, yet preserved in the silent acknowledgement of those who knew her. Eagle 1. Her fingers brushed the card again. It was more than a relic. It was a symbol of survival, skill, and a history that could not be erased. The F-22 pilots had recognized her, but the world, that would take longer, perhaps never, and that was fine. She had lived enough years in shadows to understand the value of quiet strength. The plane began to stabilize its approach. The runway stretched out in the distance, lights flickering like tiny stars guiding the aircraft home. Passengers whispered excitedly, pointing out streaks in the sky that had long since disappeared. Hannah's seatmate, a man in a crisp business suit, turned to her and whispered nervously, "Did you see that? Did you see what they just did?" Hannah gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a faint smile brushing her lips. "Yes," she said softly, her voice calm and measured. "I saw." He blinked, unsure what to make of the statement. "Are you pilots or?" She shook her head. "Just a passenger," she said, the words light, almost dismissive. Yet in her chest, Eagle 1 stirred. She had lived in obscurity for decades. Today had reminded her why some identities can never truly be hidden. As the landing gear deployed, the cabin shivered with a familiar mechanical thrum. Outside, the sunset painted the wings in amber, the fading light glinting off the aluminum with a brilliance that reminded her of the sun reflecting off a Raptor's fuselage. She couldn't stop herself from glancing at the horizon one last time, imagining the silent pilot still tracing invisible patterns, still holding that acknowledgement close. Her heart beat steadily, controlled. This flight was ending, but her story was far from over. The salute had been a reconnection with the past, a validation of her abilities and history, but the future waited, unseen and unpredictable. There were still skis to conquer, missions to imagine, and a life to reconcile between anonymity and legend. The passengers began preparing for landing. Seat belts clicked. Children squirmed. Phones were stowed. The mundane details of life on Earth began reclaiming the cabin from the extraordinary theater that had played out in silence just above them. Hannah closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. She could feel the residual vibrations of the F-22s, the echoes of the salute, the weight of acknowledgement. It was intoxicating yet grounding. It reminded her of who she was, of the skills she carried in muscle memory, of the history etched in every maneuver she had ever executed. Eagle One, a name, a call sign, a life reclaimed. The captain's voice cut through again, steadying the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are on final approach. Please remain seated. Welcome to Boston." Hannah opened her eyes, her gaze forward, calm, measured, yet alive with a quiet intensity. She adjusted the hoodie over her head, subtly shielding her eyes. The passengers remained blissfully unaware, and she intended to keep it that way. Her life, her history, her identity, it was hers to carry quietly, even as the world continued unaware of the storm that had passed above them. The runway lights grew brighter, the tires kissed the asphalt, and the aircraft shuddered gently under braking. The passengers clapped, thinking the excitement had been ordinary, another flight, another landing. Few could guess that what they had just witnessed was extraordinary beyond comprehension. Hannah exhaled, letting the tension slip from her shoulders. Her fingers brushed the laminated card one last time. She had reclaimed her call sign. She had been acknowledged. She had returned, if only for a moment, to the skis that had defined her. And yet, even as the cabin returned to ordinary life, she knew one truth: the sky had not forgotten, the pilots had not forgotten, and neither had she. Eagle One lived, ready for whatever came next, whether the world saw it or not. The door opened at the gate, the city lights glowing beyond the terminal, ordinary in every way. Passengers filed off, chatting, recording snippets, reliving the excitement they thought they understood. Hannah adjusted her bag, took a final deep breath, and walked into the airport, quiet, unassuming, ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in legacy. The sky had remembered her, the salute had been delivered, and Eagle One would never truly be forgotten.